I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome back to our film production design panel, Emmanuelle Duplay for Emilia Pérez and Nora Mendis for Nickel Boys. Welcome back, and also Stephanie, the interpreter here. So I'd like to start out by asking, what is something about your profession, about production design, that is misunderstood or that viewers at home may not realize is something that you do? Emmanuelle, let's start with you on this one.
Oui, bah, particulièrement sur Emilia Pérez, tout le film est entièrement fait en studio. Et c'est vrai que bon, les gens le réalisent pas. En fait, quand on fait un travail en studio, on essaye que ça soit le plus réaliste possible. Et souvent, les gens ne voient pas tout le travail de construction de l'espace qu'on a pu faire. Là, ce qui est intéressant dans Emilia Pérez, c'est que c'est un mix entre du réalisme et de l'abstrait. Donc, il y a justement cette possibilité d'avoir les deux et de se rendre compte que l'outil qu'est le studio, par exemple dans des scènes, par exemple la danse de Jessie qui sort de sa chambre, elle arrive comme ça, elle sort de sa chambre et elle est dans le studio noir pour finir la danse.
Especially for Emilia Perez, you know, the entire film takes place in studios. And so the audience does not realize this necessarily. We want, of course, always to, you know, make it as realistic as possible. And people don't necessarily see that at all. That you know, there's so much built behind the scenes, so people are not necessarily aware of that. And in Emilia Perez, this was wonderful because the studio allowed us to mix realism with abstraction. So we had the possibility to combine both. So we really could use the tool that the studio represents. For example, when Jessie gets out of her room, she just ends up being in complete darkness so that she can start performing her dance.
Mm. And Nora, how about you? Something that's misunderstood about production design, or something that viewers at home just don't know what you even do?
I mean, I think for a period film showing the time period and having a sense that just because it's set in the 1960s doesn't mean that everything should be from the 1960s. And in fact, in Nickel Boys, most things should really be from the 1940s or earlier, because things are not brand new and nobody exists in a space where everything is brand new at all. And especially when you're representing, you know, working class, lower middle class households versus some of the fancier spaces that they're in. You know, it's just having an awareness that a period film does not mean that everything needs to be, you know, perfect for that year, and that is actually kind of distracting. So that I think thinking about the motivation of how a character, you know, how a person furnishes their home or the place that they work, or you know, the penitentiary that they're in, you know, the juvenile delinquent home that they're in. Like, what is the difference between you know, sleeping spaces and recreational spaces? You know, in Nickel Boys in the rec room, there's clearly stuff that's left over from the white portion of the school that is all still, you know, fine and good, but it's not new and shouldn't be, you know.
Very fascinating, both of those answers. I love those. I want to kind of go back to the beginnings of both of your careers, and what would you consider to be your big break in the industry, and how did you get into production design, into this field to begin with? Nora, how about you start out this one?
Sure. I mean, I went to undergrad for experimental film, and you know, so I made a lot of silent Super 8 films. And it was very much on track to a gallery and museum world, not at all on track towards the industry. And you know, so I have a background in kind of some of the things that Ramel is referencing. So in some ways, this has gone full circle with this kind of experimental background. But you know, I came into the art department, and I did not come from architecture, and I worked my way up. I was a set deck for years. And you know, I drove cube trucks in New York City, knocked off a few mirrors, and you know, and then ended up here. I worked in the world of TV. You know, I did a few HBO shows, designed Betty with Crystal Moselle. I did Random Acts of Flyness with Terrence. You know, I worked with these extraordinary, weird, experimental directors, you know, but in the like HBO studio space where we're building everything, and they didn't really know what that meant or want to do that necessarily. But being there and being like, no, 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 we can build all this and make it feel real, make it feel like the sizes are not too big and make it not feel, you know, overly fake. You know, so that was really important in the beginning. And then for me, it's always just been collaboration with specific directors, as opposed to like a big break. And so it's like, you know, I did a pilot with Janixa Bravo, which was an amazing experience. You know, working with Ramel was really important for me. Doing Passing with Rebecca Hall was really great. You know, it's like these films were less about kind of a big break for production design, although they were, I guess, but like more for, you know, working with these specific people.
And for you, Emmanuelle?
Bah je suis architecte, donc j'ai commencé de travailler dans la décoration par l'architecture, en fait. Ce qui m'intéresse beaucoup, c'est de travailler des espaces. Donc voilà, j'ai commencé comme ça, petit à petit, et puis j'ai eu la chance de rencontrer aussi des réalisateurs formidables. D'ailleurs, l'année dernière, j'ai travaillé sur Anatomie d'une chute, qui était aux Oscars l'année dernière, de Justine Triet, où là, il n'y avait pas vraiment de studio, mais on a refait tout un chalet enfin, ce chalet faisait partie vraiment du scénario, quoi. C'était comme un troisième personnage.
So I am an architect, actually. So when I started in this, you know, production design world, it was really through this background, through the architecture background. And what I actually love in my job is to work on spaces. So I gradually got into it. And along the way, I met wonderful filmmakers. For instance, last year I collaborated in the, Oscar-nominated movie Anatomy of a Fall, as you probably know, by Justine Triet. And we didn't really work in studios that much, but we actually had to rebuild entirely a chalet. And so this chalet was actually really part of the script. It was like a third character.
And I'm curious, looking back on your careers, do you have a most memorable or unique set that you've ever helped to create on any project? Something that, you know, you'll look back fondly years from now, decades from now, and say, I can't believe I was able to build that or to create that. Emmanuelle, how about you?
I think, in fact, it's always the last movie. I feel like always the last project. You always think, it was crazy. At the moment, I'm working with a French director who win also a Golden Palm, is Julia Ducournau. Sorry, and it's always like that. The next or the last one is always the most crazy, I think.
And for you, Nora?
I did a project called Topside, which is set in the subway tunnels about community of people who live in the subways in New York City. And we didn't have access to the subways in New York City, but we got a subway tunnel that was built in Rochester, New York, by the same architect as a lot of the New York City older subway tunnels. And so we were filming and building, you know, this community inside a real sort of falling apart subway tunnel in Rochester in like, it was maybe March or April when we were there. And so in upstate New York, that's still like, there is a lot of snow. It's still like real winter. And And that was probably the craziest location and we built an entire, we needed 8 houses plus, and by houses, I mean sort of shacks, but, spaces that had beds and spaces to be in, and that really had to glow from the outside because we would have these shots going down the track, where you see the glowing of each house. And, that was kind of one of the craziest spaces. I was also pregnant at the time, and we're like underground in this like really dark, weird space. And it was definitely memorable.
I'd love to talk about budgets, and studios give you a certain budget. And what are some tricks of the trade you've learned along the way that you can get your most out of the money that you have? Is there any secrets you can spill? How about you, Nora?
I mean, this is not at all a secret, but I think the biggest thing is that it is worth spending more money on amazing people and collaborators than on the objects. And because when you bring in people who have experience and have creativity in their own right, the job is such a collaboration. As a production designer on Nickel Boys, I work with so many people, all of whom were from the New Orleans area. I didn't bring anybody who I had worked with before. So it was an entirely new crew for me. And I fought to get the rates higher sort of at the loss of some of my, rentals and materials budgets. And because I got this, I worked with this amazing set decorator, Monique Champagne. Shout out to her. She's just like knew New Orleans, knew everything that you could get within, a 10-hour radius. And I also had an incredible scenic team, which for a period film, there is a fine line between a scenic crew that makes things look right, maybe for a TV or something that's not so detailed, and then something that's just more careful. And my scenic crew was amazing, and it was because it was worth it to me to pay rates for people that were above the lines of the parameters of Nickel Boys. But we got better people. They were amazing. And it's like, and this job is a collaboration. And it's not like I'm out there doing everything by myself at all. You need to be able to trust the people that you're working with. So that was the biggest thing for this. I mean, there really is no secret. I don't think, not that I found.
Emmanuelle, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. In France, I feel that the budgets are really lower than in the States. So we are often doing, je vais passer en français, on est beaucoup moins nombreux, les équipes sont beaucoup moins nombreuses qu'aux États-Unis. J'ai travaillé un petit peu à Los Angeles et à New York aussi, et je vois comment les équipes sont. Nous, en France, on est moins nombreux. Et donc, mais je suis tout à fait d'accord sur le fait qu'il faut mieux dépenser de l'argent sur d'avoir de bons collaborateurs et la quantité suffisante que en accessoires et en matériaux, c'est sûr.
In France, our budgets are usually lower than those in the United States. Oftentimes, also our teams are, more reduced than the big teams in the United States. I know this because I worked on projects in Los Angeles and New York City in the past. But in France, really, we're usually, less people. But I agree with you that it's, your money is best used to bring in the good collaborators, enough collaborators as well. It's more important than, spending on props and other materials.
And do any of you have personal heroes within the production design industry? Maybe someone you've always looked up to and you've always wanted to work with? Anyone whose sets and builds have always stuck in your memories? Emmanuelle, how about you?
We have the famous Alexandre Troneur, this French production designer that, it's a historical work, but it's really interesting. I would say him, yeah.
Nora?
I'm sorry, I'm terrible with pulling names like on the spur of the moment like this. So off the top of my head, no.
Gotcha. Well, before we go, I would love to talk about awards. Awards season is coming up. The Oscars, the Production Design Guild, and other awards around the country and around the world. What do awards mean to you? What could they mean to your movie if your movie gets nominated? If you personally get nominated, we're an awards website at Gold Derby, so we love talking about this kind of thing. Nora, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think that the main thing is that awards give the film more exposure. And so Nickel Boys has not come out yet, so we don't really have a sense of what the exposure will be in the mainstream. The reaction at the festivals has been amazing, but festivals are a bit of a bubble of people who already love movies. And so, I'm from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago, which is like a 99% Black part of Chicago. And my parents are wondering if Nickel Boys is going to come. They're like, movies like this sort of come to the South Side sometimes. And I was like, I hope it does, and if it's up for awards, I think it's more likely that it'll make it to these communities. And that's important. Awards are great. It's hard to say what an award does exactly, but I think the exposure for the film and for the filmmakers and for Ramel and Jocelyn would be amazing. Ramel deserves every single bit of the kind of creativity and the idea that this film that is a bit outside of the mainstream in terms of the POV, in terms of the montage, in terms of the archival, all of that was made by a studio. I think if it wins awards or even is nominated, will allow for studios to imagine outside of the confines of this very specific mainstream filmmaking. And maybe they will allow more films that are weirder and just not on the exact track.
Mm-hmm. I always love the experimental films, the weird films. Those always tend to be my favorites. And Emmanuelle, close us out here. What do awards mean to you?
En France, on a le Festival de Cannes, les Césars, voilà. Donc ça, moi, comme je fais, enfin, ça m'arrive assez souvent d'être nominée aux Césars et puis d'avoir des films qui sont à Cannes, qui ont des prix. Ça c'est quelque chose d'assez usuel. Mais tout d'un coup, les Oscars, aux États-Unis, c'est vraiment autre chose en fait. C'est complètement un autre. Pour nous, les Français, c'est formidable. Et c'est surtout formidable pour la visibilité du film. Voilà, pour Jacques Audiard, c'est formidable.
So in France, we have the Cannes Festival, as you know, the César or Caesar Awards, and I often get nominated for the Caesar Awards and often as well for the Cannes Festival Awards. So that's one thing. But here to have this film nominated for the Oscars in the United States, it's completely different. Okay, and so it's wonderful, for France. It's wonderful for this movie's visibility, and it's also wonderful for Jacques. Pardon, Emmanuelle, vous vouliez dire?
Okay. No, if it's
if it gets the prize, you mean? Okay, if it gets the prize, it would be wonderful for Jacques, and it would be wonderful for the movie visibility.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all for chatting with us today. I learned so much about what you do, and everyone should go out and see your movies, Emilia Pérez and Nickel Boys. Thank you and best of luck coming up at the awards season.
Thank you. Thank you very much.